Translated with deepl.com. Disclaimer. This is an unofficial translation. Source.
Interessantes und Wissenswertes zu Viren und Bakterien.
Interesting and worth knowing about viruses and bacteria.
735th Contact Friday, 3rd of April 2020, 23.48h.
Here I am, Edward, greet you. You called me through Florena, dear friend, what's so urgent?
First of all, greetings and welcome, Ptaah, my friend. Look here, I received this fax from Elizabeth, and I think that an urgent answer to it might be necessary, because if such thoughts are cherished as they are written in this fax and possibly spread, nasty misunderstandings and fear will arise. But we have to prevent that. And for that purpose it will be necessary that you explain in more detail what you explained in our last conversations about what is mentioned in this fax. Unfortunately, it is always the case that when something is explained, it can never be enough, because ill-considered assumptions, crooked thoughts and wrong interpretations are made of everything and everyone, and this usually always happens, because effective and real deep thinking and reasoning and fathoming out something explained is not the strength of many people on earth. The whole of the fax that Elizabeth received by email refers to what you explained on 3rd February under point 17.
17. Our observations and findings also show that the second genetically modified coronavirus behaves very aggressively to fatally in the human organism, depending on the corresponding immune status, as well as reluctantly, which leads to recovery. Although this does not correspond to complete destruction of the virus, our findings show that certain genetic variants do not die off even during recovery, but remain latently present, but are not immediately recognizable or detectable, as is the case with various other diseases. In the case of this insidious corona disease, however, it can happen unexpectedly some years or decades later, for example, through intimate contact, that the latent, dormant evil can be transmitted, but then an unusual phenomenon occurs in such a way that, as a result of the altered genetic variations of the known virus, a disease reaction occurs in a completely different form. However, this fact cannot be grasped by terrestrial research with medical and virological apparatus and other technology because, according to our predictions, the instruments required for this cannot yet be developed and constructed in the current third millennium. Although the people on Earth think that they have at their disposal a highly developed technology with very sophisticated technical values, what is true is that the entire earthly technology of any kind is no more than a first step out of deepest darkness into a faint glimmer of a still very distant light.
That, dear friend, is in my opinion the reason for the facts which you should please read.
Ptaah reads. Start of the forwarded message, from, figure, subject, WTR, form input from, contact form, date, the 2nd of April 2020 at 18:48 and 7 seconds CEST. 2, Elizabeth Gruber, submitted on Thursday, April 2, 2020. 9:31 by these values were entered, first and last name, A. B.
Preferred language, German. Your message to us. I would like to ask some questions regarding the new vital information concerning the disease, which has been published on the Figure website. 1. Since, on the basis of such recently published information, the virus rapidly mutates and becomes more aggressive and, in addition, behaves differently depending on the immune system of the respective peoples, it could be assumed that if at some point a vaccination is found to be ineffective or only partially effective, that is, it will either not protect healthy people from the virus infection or only partially, because in the meantime the virus has already mutated to such an extent that vaccination does not provide effective protection. If this were the case, it would mean that possibly only some pharmaceutical agents or drugs could treat and cure the virus disease. 2. What is the actual situation in this respect? 3. According to a statement I recently made on the English Figu forum in a post from the moderator who quoted a telephone information from a Figu KG member, there are currently several million infected people worldwide, and because of the above-mentioned Blagerian source of information, it is so that in the body of people infected by the virus, traces of the virus remain permanently in the gene structure, and therefore the disease can reappear after years and the infected people can infect others even after recovery, although they have no more symptoms, result negative in the virus test, and are therefore considered cured for earthly medicine. So it looks like this epidemic is unstoppable or very difficult to fight, because a possible vaccination could only be administered to healthy people and not to those who have recovered from the virus disease, who are still infectious and therefore carry the disease further and for a long time in the future. This seems to be a hopeless situation, unless some drug is discovered and used that is capable of genetically destroying every trace of the virus in the body from scratch. Is that correct? With kind regards, AB.
This is indeed thoughtless, unpleasant and annoying, and is in keeping with what you have said, that assumptions, wrong thoughts and similar interpretations will be devised which may cause fear and disaster, so obviously a further and more comprehensive explanation will be inevitable.
Right.
I will, and
I thought you wouldn't say no, because it's really necessary. But I have to ask you to explain it, as it is always necessary, in a language understandable to the earthlings and in enough detail. Certainly questions will arise again, even if nothing will be misunderstood, because on the one hand one or the other is not understood.
That will be the case, but also that elements will question everything stupid and impudent in order to make themselves important. On the other hand, however, it will lead on, namely, that elements who have become addicted to a know-it-all urge will think up false theories and spread false information. Unfortunately, it will also be the case that experts will not accept the truth, because they will not be able to access teachings that are incomprehensible to them, and will not be able to consider and therefore also not acknowledge unknown, foreign insights and higher knowledge in their arrogance.
That will be the case, as they will probably also claim in their narrow-mindedness that everything is nonsense and only a work of my imagination, etc., as is also claimed in this and that way with regard to our contacts, which are disguised as deception, conceit, fantasy, delusion, lies and cheating. And as you know, this is still happening today, even though for our contacts there are not only photographs and reports of experiences of many people who have experienced various things in connection with our contacts, which was effectively more than just extraordinary. Witness reports, not only from figure members of the core and passive groups from all over the world, but also from persons independent of figure, prove that everything concerning our contacts corresponds to reality. All this and much more, but it will not be of any use if there is no attempt to tear me apart with regard to what is now circulating worldwide in terms of your statements about the corona pandemic.
What you say is unfortunately already so today due to the double-monstrous stupidity of those who deny the truth, who search your web presence on the internet and gain knowledge from it, while others insult you, and especially you, as a large number of politicians and heads of state do, as we have been observing for decades. This is also the case in so-called UFO groups, which deny you and our contacts on the one hand because you have been slandered by your former wife and former friends of hers and by members who have fallen in love with her, and on the other hand by envious people and by some pathologically conditioned but unfulfillable wish to be in your place, etc.
Well, you've said that now, and you obviously like there, but we really shouldn't keep bringing it up, even if I briefly touch on it, in relation to the fact that our contacts are doubted. It is simply not good if my ex and the antagonists who unanimously agree with her, as well as the other opponents and the Christian religious Mephistopheles who believe her, who call themselves theosophists and sect fighters etc., are repeatedly brought into the field. Well, I think that you—
Sorry, it wasn't my intention to meet you. You have rebelled against it on several occasions, but sometimes it just pushes me to let the truth be told, because you don't openly defend yourself against the insults, lies and slander, and you don't pay attention to the hostility directed against you, which can always and at any time get out of hand, as it has happened 23 times already. You should consider that, my friend.
I already do, but what has been said now should be enough. Please.
Yes, you're right. Then I will try to interpret what I said during our conversation on February 3rd in more detailed explanations and in a use of words that I can assume will be understood. I will start by explaining again some things worth knowing about viruses and bacteria, whereby I will also use the usual earthly terms for certain explanations.
Regarding the viruses, as I already explained on February 3rd, these simple infectious organic structures correspond to and are therefore completely different from bacilli or bacteria.
Viruses correspond to inanimate structures that have one or more molecules in them, which are the same in some of the approximately 7 million species in various forms, such as spheres, rods or tail carriers etc. The molecules given in a structure are carriers of deoxyribonucleic acid, deoxyribonucleic acid or DNA, which corresponds to a double strand, and of ribonucleic acid, ribonucleic acid or RNA, which as a rule has only one strand, although both carry the bases adenine, cytosine and guanine. There is a big difference between viruses and bacteria, because unlike bacteria, which are living beings, consist of their own cell, have their own metabolism and thus their own energy production and are therefore capable of protein synthesis, viruses, which are only 300 nanometers in size, have no such capabilities as organic structures and have no life whatsoever. Viruses exist everywhere, but if people are only attacked by a certain small number of the approximately 7 million species, they make them really sick or die from them. And when a person recovers from a viral disease, it does not necessarily guarantee a complete cessation of the pathogens, because they are often still excreted by infectious substances, such as excretions from excrement, breath, saliva and spit, expiratory droplets, but also blood from wounds and intimate contact or a wet pronunciation, etc., which can still occur some time after the disease has been contracted. Viruses cause infections, such as HIV/AIDS, serious gastrointestinal infections, also hepatitis, measles, rubella, common cold and chickenpox, but also deadly diseases and epidemics. Viruses are not easy to combat with medication, not even antibiotics, because medication is ineffective against viral diseases. Although certain antiviral drugs can be used against individual types of viruses, they can really only be used against some of them. This means that the viruses are constantly changing gene variably, such as the influenza virus, which is very flexible in its mutations, thus constantly creating new forms of influenza that constantly challenge the immune system anew. And this is also the reason why each influenza vaccine is only effective for a single wave of influenza and thus only for a certain number of months, but is then completely ineffective for the next influenza generation. So the ever-changing influenza virus means that it must be researched annually and the vaccine must be adapted to its new genetically modified properties. Influenza is not as harmless as is assumed as a result of ignorance of terrestrial mankind, because even though it is not usually made public that it can be fatal, many thousands of people die every year when waves of influenza appear. Vaccinations protect against influenza only against a single occurrence of the disease, not, as is the case with other diseases, where vaccinations provide protection for years. It should also be noted that the immune system cannot easily and quickly adapt to a new wave of influenza and therefore needs a long time to cope with the virus. With other diseases, where the body's own defense can kill a germ or pathogen, the organism becomes immune to the corresponding virus in many cases. This means that a second infection cannot occur with the same pathogen. If people are healthy and therefore have a healthy, high-energy immune system, then this usually reacts very quickly and fights viruses that have entered the organism quite successfully. Nevertheless, viruses can nevertheless cause significant and life-threatening diseases. This means something that is unknown to medical, immunological and virological experts on Earth, that two completely different factors are involved. It means that a disease that is dormant in the human organism is activated and breaks out, while in the other case it means that a new pathogen that has actively entered the organism creates or becomes a disease and breaks out as a disease. Here the fact comes into play that a once acute disease, which has recovered, but has deposited in the entire organism as a medically undetectable impulse symptom, but has been genetically altered again as such or as a result of an impulse symptom change, is triggered as a new altered disease. However, this is unknown to the entire terrestrial medical, immunological and virological sciences, but I will go into this in more detail later in connection with the coronavirus. Viruses penetrate not only into the organisms and thus into the cells of human beings, but also into all genera and species of mammals, animals and countless other forms of life, as well as plants of all kinds. If viruses do not find host cells in their environment, wherever they exist or in any living creature, then they atrophy paralyzingly and dissolve in their organic structure, because they cannot die and die because they are effectively lifeless and not living beings. So all explanations in this regard correspond to earthly complete nonsense, that viruses would die in the absence of host cells, because what does not exist in the true sense of life cannot become lifeless and cannot die either, but only wither and dissociate, decompose and dissolve. Although viruses are lifeless structures, they require living host cells of any living organism to reproduce. When viruses penetrate a body and dock to host cells, the entire organism is infected and multiplies rapidly, and the cells produce the structural elements required by the viruses. Once the viruses have released their genetic material in the host cells, the host cells have to produce an uninhibited number of virus particles and combine them to form new viruses, after which the host cell dies and thousands of new viruses are excreted. These immediately seek out new host cells, such as muscle cells, liver cells or others, as well as red and white blood cells, etc. When people become ill from viruses, they usually become infectious and transmit the pathogens directly or indirectly to other people or possibly also to other living beings. Recovery from a viral disease does not necessarily guarantee a complete cessation of the pathogens, because often they are still excreted by infectious substances, such as excretions from excrement, breath, saliva and spit, expiratory droplets, as well as blood from wounds, intimate contact or a wet pronunciation, etc., which may occur even sometime after the disease is over. If a person is attacked by the coronavirus, or any other virus, and comes to recovery or survives the epidemic, this does not result from any drugs that are directly directed against the virus, that are beneficial and used to kill the virus. Such medical remedies do not exist, because a virus is not a living being, but corresponds to an infectious organic structure which, unlike bacteria, cannot take in food and therefore cannot take in medicine and has no metabolism. Therefore, recovery can only take place when the whole of an existing viral activity is fought by the immune system, if it has the appropriate energy and strength to stop the virus and its function in such a way that it falls into a state of paralysis in the human organism. Only in this respect can medicines with antibodies be useful, if they strengthen the immune system and also make it more resistant, so that the immune system can cause viral paralysis. In a complete paralysis, a virus is no longer able to carry out any effect because an absolute functional negative state prevents any movement and this dissolves in its entire structure and thus no longer exists. Consequently, it follows that in the entire human organism, as in other living beings, when this structural dissolution takes place, the virus can no longer be detected in any way, except when antibodies are formed in certain of the 7 million or so viral species when they are fought. In the case of recovery, as I have already pointed out, it is a fact that once a disease has been acute and has recovered, it can no longer be medically detected, even though impulse symptoms of the virus have been deposited throughout the organism. Such deposits, which are to be described as impulse symptom transformation, do not turn out to be pathogens, but, as the explanation says, only as vibration-related impulse symptoms, which have superfine frequencies and can only be determined by means of appropriate apparatus. Such apparatuses are neither known to the corresponding earthly techniques and sciences nor are there any approaches to knowledge about them. The deposition of impulse symptoms and their transformation with genetic changes is also completely unknown to the terrestrial medical, virological and immunological sciences, and consequently also that these impulse symptoms last a lifetime and can cause new but altered diseases, not the original one from which these impulse symptoms originated, but as a result of the gene variations altered by the transformation, which can attack the organism when the immune system is weak. However, as already mentioned, this is completely and absolutely unknown to the entire terrestrial medical, immunological and virological sciences. However, the explained does not mean in any way that the human being is therefore marked by the virus, because the whole thing remains only a virus gene modification image or as a vibration-related impulse symptom in the human organism, without the danger that it could become active again in its original form. However, this can no longer be medically or virologically determined or proven, because it is effectively a virus image symptom which can only be detected by frequency detection equipment due to its extremely fine vibration. However, the entire sciences of terrestrial electromagnetic technology, medicine, virology and immunology as well as chemistry etc., are not yet capable of this and will not be able to do so for centuries to come. Only the oscillation-related impulse symptom is established in the entire organism, as is inevitably the case with any viral disease, but these impulse symptoms remain, and without causing any damage. This means, however, that these impulses may, when the right opportunity arises, as a result of their gene variation mutation, favor other and new diseases and help them to break out actively. However, as I have to explain repeatedly, the entire terrestrial medical, virological and immunological sciences are not aware of this, nor of the fact that the mutations and new gene variations emanating from the virus are stored in the human organism as a symptom of the impulse, and that this is the case throughout the life of the human being. It must therefore be made clear that this storage is not the pathogen itself, but only an impulse symptom oscillation that is integrated into the entire organism. As explained, however, it is not a direct pathogen that continues to exist, but only a dormant factor of impulse symptom oscillations, which can possibly serve as an indicator for the triggering of subterranean existing germs or new germs entering the organism by new ones. However, the whole thing can also be such that the original disease, which had arisen from a virus attack and created impulse symptom oscillations, can be caused again by a new infection, if there is no proper medication and thus no purpose-related vaccination, and consequently a new similar disease can occur. In this way alone, a susceptibility to another similar infection or to a similar or completely new disease can be given, if an infection is not prevented by a preventive vaccination, whereby germ-corresponding vaccinations may have to be repeated from time to time. This is because with certain vaccinations their effectiveness diminishes after a certain time and a routine refreshment must be carried out, such as a tetanus vaccination, which loses its protective effect after 8 to 10 years, depending on the state of the immune system. A basic tetanus vaccination does not therefore mean that it would provide lifelong protection against tetanus bacteria. All this, my friend, was, in my opinion, still to be explained, with which everything necessary should now be explained to prevent further proliferation of unreasonable interpretations, fears and theories.
All the things you've explained, that should really be enough. On the other hand, however, it will be the case that the majority of the so-called specialists, such as doctors and other physicians, virologists, immunologists, chemists and all sorts of know-it-alls and wisdom crackers etc., in their narrow-mindedness, knowingly deny everything and condemn it to the realm of fantasy and illusion.
That will be so, because the know-it-all, as you rightly call the behavior of such earthly people, corresponds to a delusion of arrogance and self-opinionatedness and claiming to be in possession of an all-knowing.
That is well said, but I would like to expand on that by saying that such earthlings consider themselves to be smart alecks and nincompoops, but who in reality are just stupid sayings, wise noses, quibblers, hair-splitters, pedants and syllabiologists, as well as paragraph writers and even righteous people, as you said. Basically, however, they are nothing more than word twisters, critics, sticklers for principles and naggers. And that says it all. What I still have here is this advertising double interview with Drive, Anne Katharina's Skirk. If you would like to read this advertising material and express your opinion about it,
I can do that. It is incomprehensible that such half-truths and partly nonsense can be spread. The nonsense alone, etc., is so absurdly nonsensical that the prospectus is not only maliciously misleading but should be prohibited. I feel compelled to explain a number of things. The mere claim that there are no good and no bad strains of bacteria is a bold lie, because some bacteria are good and useful, while others are bad, harmful, even dangerous and deadly. Basically, however, the good bacteria are much more useful for the health and well-being of all living beings than the bad ones are harmful. In relation to humans alone, bacteria are both useful helpers and disease-causing agents. In a number of well over 100 trillion per person, they populate his entire organism as tiny, nasty and harmful pathogens or as good and even very necessary and vital living beings, starting from the skin to the heart and all the organs, whereby the most important carrier factors of bacilli are the intestines and the stomach. There are also numerous bacteria on the skin of the body, billions of them, which form a protective film and normally fend off pathogens, as I already explained on 3 February in connection with disinfectants, which kill the vital skin bacteria when disinfecting hands with disinfectants. Most bacteria, however, are predominantly found in the large intestine, where they break down food residues and thus aid digestion. Good and useful intestinal bacteria, such as lactic acid bacteria and bifidobacteria, are designed to displace bad and disease-causing bacteria, and they also help break down food and form short-chain fatty acids, which in turn supply the intestinal mucosa with energy. On the one hand, bacteria are pathogens, such as Salmonella, especially with regard to colds and other infectious diseases. Most strains of bacteria are harmless or even do good and vital things, so that humans, like all other living beings, could hardly or not at all live without bacteria. The skin alone, which covers the entire body, is protected by a dense film of bacteria comprising billions of units. This, while other trillions of bacteria in the stomach and intestines digest food. All bacteria have different peculiarities, which I will list as follows.
1. Bacteria are microscopically small living beings. 2. Bacteria are either good, useful and vital, or bad, dangerous and deadly. 3. Bacteria are unicellular organisms. 4. Bacteria have a metabolism. 5. Bacteria are able to reproduce or propagate themselves. 6. Bacteria can be up to 100 times larger than viruses. 7. Bacteria multiply by cell division. 8. Bacteria have various forms, for example coccus, rods or spirals. 9. Bacteria consist of a single living cell. 10. Bacteria multiply incredibly fast under the right conditions. 11. Bacteria multiply by cell division. 12. Bacteria are extremely adaptable and quickly adapt to any situation. 13. Bacteria are aerobics that require oxygen. 14. Bacteria are anaerobes that do not require oxygen. Some can do both. 15. Bacteria can tolerate either extremely low or high temperatures. There are many species of bacteria, but most of them have no connection to humans and therefore have no relation to their health and existence, nor to their life.
The majority of all bacterial species correspond to natural and useful forms, while only a small number of them cause illness, suffering and death, which can be very severe in this respect. Many other bacteria are hermaphrodites between good or evil, causing problems only under certain conditions, such as when they multiply too much, when any changes occur, when their environment changes, or when a host organism decays due to weakness, etc. The fact is that man, like all living beings, cannot live without bacteria, because without stomach and intestinal bacteria alone there would be no digestion and therefore no metabolism for him. Already at the beginning of life, which in its origin basically came into being through the transformation of viruses, many types of bacterial strains made the emergence of the living beings that developed from the first life forms possible. This has also happened on Earth, and all bacteria have survived everything, until today, and in spite of all adverse circumstances, which were caused by evolution on the one hand, and on the other hand, especially during the last 2 centuries, very catastrophically by mankind. Among the bad and evil bacteria are, of course, the pathogens, and especially the germ Escherichia coli, which causes serious infections in the gastrointestinal tract and other parts of the body. Then there are the Salmonella, which cause serious illnesses as a result of poisoning, such as typhoid fever, paratyphoid fever and enteritis or intestinal inflammation, which in severe cases can only be combated with antibiotics. Caries is also caused by bad bacteria, but there are also various staphylococci and streptococci that cause skin and mucous membrane infections, both in children and adults. For example, the bad gram-positive bacteria cause infections and severe and dangerous inflammations even in immunocompetent people. These are the explanations I wanted to give. Billy, thank you for your comments and explanations. Then I have a question regarding the wearing of protective masks against the coronavirus. Although you have explained a lot about this lately, I would like to know to what extent and where it would make sense to wear such masks in the near future. I have already explained what will make sense in this regard, but I would like to repeat and explain it again. If protective masks are to be worn against infections by pathogens, then it is only sensible if they are specially manufactured for this purpose and accordingly fulfill the purpose of preventing infection in their design, density and appropriate filtering. Basically, such products are only equivalent to medical masks, but suitable masks can also be used as protection to prevent secretions from the mouth and respiratory organs from being transmitted to other people at a closer distance and in terms of transmission to other people, just as suitable masks can also be used to prevent secretions from the mouth and respiratory organs of other people. Such simple masks, however, do not protect against viruses and bacteria, because if this purpose is to be achieved, it requires appropriate medical masks. Simple protective masks, as I have called them, can of course be worn everywhere, but it is pointless and useless if they are worn everywhere outdoors and other people or such are not present at several meters distance. Wearing a valuable protective mask only makes sense if it is used sensibly, but this cannot be the case if it is used in day-to-day life. And necessity exists only in the case of heavy pedestrian traffic on the street and in buildings etc., used by a large number of people, precisely where it is necessary, such as clinics, supply places such as food shopping centers of all kinds, in indispensable community activities with several employees, as well as in conversations with a small circle or other small groups of people, in gatherings of people, or in the close or narrow area of people affected by disease or epidemics, whether indoors or outdoors. But now, Edward, do I have to go if you don't have anything else to discuss?
No, I didn't, but thank you very much, and Bernadette will work up what you have explained and pass it on to all figure members, after which it will be put on the internet.
Then it should be our entire conversation without any taking away.
You mean that the entire contact report?
That is the meaning of my statement. But now, Edward, my friend, now I really must go. Goodbye.
Okay, then. Bye, thank you and goodbye.